IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I am Saurabh Todi, and I have with me my colleague Shambhavi Naik, and we are going to discuss the India-US cooperation in bioeconomy and biotechnology. So, in the light of the upcoming state visit of PM Modi to the US, we will discuss, what is actually bioeconomy and what exactly does this topic entail? What are the different avenues of bioeconomy, and how are countries, such as India, China, USA, and other major economies looking at bioeconomy, and what is the potential for cooperation between India and USA, if any, on bioeconomy. So a very warm welcome, Shambhavi.
Thanks, Saurabh. And I think you have raised some very important topics. The first one is obviously being the contribution of the bioeconomy to India's GDP, and obviously the way countries around the world approach bioeconomy. So I think before I start, let's just talk a little bit about the bioeconomy, what this concept means, where has it come from, and what is its importance, right? So I think the idea of a bioeconomy, I think, was first kind of conceptualized in 1999 in an executive order signed by then President Bill Clinton, in which he emphasized that there have to be more bio-based industry in the US. And I think they envisioned two things. They thought that this could be an important driver of the economy, and also that it would be a very important player in creating rural employment in the US because it would leverage natural resources. And so the term that they used was bio-based industry, and this has kind of now evolved into what we call the bioeconomy. So it's basically where you use biotechnology to kind of add value to existing natural resources, bio-based resources, and then there's obviously then a layer of trade etc on it, which actually then provides the economic inputs, right? World over, I think, as the technology itself has evolved, we see like two different kind of emphasis that people have put on bioeconomy. One is where they look at biotechnology as a good alternative for fossil fuels, etc., in achieving sustainable development. And then there are countries which have actually said that, look, biotechnology is going to be very important in creating jobs and in creating and in driving the economy. So it's going to have a very big economic sector impact, and therefore we want to leverage biotechnology to actually help drive the economy, right? India had a bioeconomy report that the Department of Biotechnology released back in 2022, but it doesn't actually have a definition for the bioeconomy. And since there is no definition, it means that there is a question on what can be included, how do we shape policies to actually leverage the technology, etc. Within India's biotech sector, within India's bioeconomy, the report includes bioagriculture, bioindustry, bio-IT, etc. So I think the first thing that we should really think about is what is it that we want to take out from biotechnology. And I think as a developing nation, our focus has to be on the use of biotechnology as the economic driver. Sustainable development has to be a longer term goal, as obviously we are switching off from fossil fuels. We have made commitments. We have, for example, committed to moving to 20% blended biodiesel, that's 20% ethanol in petrol by a certain date. So we have made those commitments, which we have to reach, but our priority has to be economic growth and how we can best leverage biotechnology to do this. The third thing, I think, from an Indian context, which is very important, given geographically where we are, it's health security, because a number of new emerging pathogens have emerged in the countries around us, which puts us in a really vulnerable situation. So if I have to really rank how I would like to see India use biotech, it is first to drive economy, second to enable health security, and both of these are in the short to mid terms. And in the longer term, look at sustainable development. And I think any activities that fall under this grouping should then be considered as part of the bioeconomy. What are your thoughts on that, Saurabh?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, as you said, it is quite fascinating because, the bioeconomy itself has no definition. So each country tries to essentially define bioeconomy in their own way, especially how that is seen in their domestic context. And so, for example, I mean, like the definition of bioeconomy by the US, it is different. By China, it is different. By EU, it is different. Some focus more on biopharmaceuticals. Some focus on bioagriculture. And for some, it is more or less, includes everything that has to do with biology. I mean, either directly or indirectly. So I think through that, I think it is something that is very important. And India certainly, I mean, has the potential. And given that we have a very significant pharma sector, and the Indian biotechnology report also, does emphasize that India's bioeconomy or the value of the industry is about, I think, $150 billion in the next few years, and I think it is $300 billion by 2030. So it's a quite significant and ambitious kind of target. But I think how we go about it is a very big challenge. So I was curious, Shambhavi. So how do other countries see bioeconomy? I mean, if we look at, let's say, the US and China, like, have they spelled out what exactly do they mean bioeconomy or biomanufacturing? And do they have very detailed plans of how they plan to at least achieve that?
Right, and they do, right, and I think it first comes with setting the target, right, which I think India has done. It's a very ambitious target, like you said. We want to go from $80 billion to $300 billion, which is actually a shift from contributing 2.6% of GDP to 5% of GDP in 8 years' times, which is going to take a lot of bolstering policies, is going to take a lot of international cooperation for us to achieve. And I think in that regard, we need to find like-minded partners within other nations with whom we can cooperate, where there is this recognition that the bioeconomy is going to be a very important driver of economies, right? So both the US and China they've previously taken concrete steps in trying to bolster their bioeconomy, and I think they continue to do so. China, for example, I think in their 14th plan, they had dedicated the plan to bioeconomy. There very explicit mention of how they will try to emphasize on developing a better bioeconomy. This was a 14th five-year plan. They also then had another document out on the bioeconomy from the National Development and Reform Commission, which was, I think, both kind of look at biomanufacturing to be a very important space in the future. So I think if you consider then bioeconomy, there are two aspects to it, right? First is the innovation, the research and development, which might not by itself be contributing to bioeconomy in the same way that biomanufacturing and trade of goods and services based on biology provides. But obviously, innovation gives you IP rights, gives you the rights to actually sell something at a fixed price for a amount of time. And this is something that obviously India has to kind of develop more. You spoke about pharmaceutical sector. India does provide a lot of biosimilars. So technically, in the bioeconomy, you will have biosimilars. Generics which are chemical compounds, might not fall under the bioeconomy. But again, these are both kind of ways to substitute pharmaceuticals which have gone off patent but were essentially innovated some elsewhere. And what we need is more innovation in-house as well. And I think both in the US and China recognize that and have invested money into creating more innovation, right? The second part of this pathway is biomanufacturing. And currently Europe has one of the biggest biomanufacturing facilities, but nothing that is going to match the demand that we are probably going to see over the next few years. And what we see that China seems ready to be wanting to occupy the space. They can obviously scale at affordable prices, and therefore they are making significant investments into that. The US also very recently introduced its National Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Initiative, where they committed $2 billion in investments, 1.5 for research and development, and the establishment of the new biomanufacturing institutes across the US. So clearly, these two countries recognize. In addition, the OECD has reported that up to 50 countries worldwide have specialized bioeconomy policies to shape their bioeconomy. So clearly, this is something that all countries value and see the importance of. And therefore, I think it is necessary that India also remains ambitious and finds good partners that it can work with to actually achieve those goals.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. And I think what is also kind of very significant is that in addition to bioeconomy being like one of the main drivers of the economy in future, and so much of research also happening on that front, there's also a security component which I think is less talked about. Like, for example, the US NSA, like Jake Sullivan, I think in a speech in 2021, he was, he expressed concern about, the risks that are associated with biotechnology. And he said that, like biotechnology is something that, holds great promise for advancing science and medicine, but at the same time enables the possibility of accidental or intentional misuse. And for example, it should be emphasized that, both major players and the global community, that it like there is a need for the responsible and ethical development of biotech, including, making sure that there is a robust regulatory framework. And then obviously for that you need cooperation between countries, and we have to ensure that, there is this limited proliferation of biotechnology for dangerous purposes. So, on one hand, it is very useful that this technology, biotechnology, biomanufacturing, all of these would contribute to the growth of, bioeconomy. But there needs to be, for example, we saw what happened during COVID, right? Whether or not, it is a lab leak or it is natural or whatever it is, like those are immaterial. But the point is that something that, if let's assume it may be some sort of a lab leak, we can see the disastrous consequences both to the life of people, to economies, to global, growth and everything. So that there needs to be a focus on regulation and focus on cooperation, but at the same time making sure that, there is enough channels of communication between countries and between scientists, that, there is a limited scope for anything to be done in secret. So in the next part, Shambhavi, what do you think are the different avenues for cooperation between India and USA in this field? And why should we consider like India and US to have cooperation in this field? So, for example, just to give a brief background to our listeners, so India and US, announced this cooperation called the ICET, which is like a short form for US India Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technology, under which, both countries, they did commit to identify several critical sectors to expand bilateral strategic technology partnership between governments, business, academic institutions, civil society, etc. And in these, there are many things, defense, the proposed deal for jet engines is also under this scheme, and semiconductors. And like during the announcement, they did identify biotechnology as one of the sectors on which ICET would focus. But there has not been much movement on this. So what do you think, is the reason behind this, and like what are the different avenues for cooperation on that?
Thanks, Saurabh. I think biotechnology is such a wide field. I think people get confused on what exactly can be done to improve cooperation, right? I think India and US partnership makes sense for three broad reasons. One, I think, as I said, there are two arms to bioeconomy, right? There is the research part and there is biomanufacturing. Obviously, India has to buck up on innovation. But at this point of time, I think there are complementary strengths because US has all of the research and innovation, and India has the ability to scale biomanufacturing at affordable prices. I think, as I said, US is also focusing on biomanufacturing, but scaling at affordable prices, and particularly prices of competitive with that of the current market leader, which is China, is going to be important. And I think complementary strengths there make US and India very natural allies. Second is that shared global interest really of diversifying bio-based supply chains. We saw during COVID that there was a massive issue when it came to some of the vaccines, when it came to other pandemic related products, because till then, but apart from vaccines, China was a major supplier for a lot of these products. And that has to change. We need to have some diversification of these supply chains. And India is, again, a natural alternative in terms of achieving scale. And third is, like you mentioned, is about uplifting biosecurity in our area, in our geography. I think it is critical. I think there's global interest in doing that as well. And India-US collaboration in the field of biotech is nothing really new. We have got several initiatives that we have been running for a long time now. We have the India-US Technology Summit that happens. There was a India-US Science and Technology Joint Commission meeting. There's funding that is available for the exchange of people, for attending conferences, etc. And obviously there is the Indo-U.S. Science and Technology Forum, which assists in cooperation between India and US when it comes to S&T. So we already have like the building grounds there. We're very familiar with each other's cultures. There's a commitment to growing bioeconomy. There's a commitment to open science. Both countries have come forward and said that, publicly funded research should be freely available, and both countries are trying to figure out how to achieve this. So I think there's a shared approach on how we can best use biotechnology to innovate as well as to manufacture, and that I think makes India and US very like-minded partners in this particular area, and therefore I think cooperation just, it makes complete sense. And I think what we can really discuss is, how can this cooperation manifest, what can be achievable, what if there are three things that we would like this trip to kind of finalize on, what would those be?
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
What are your thoughts on that, Saurabh?
That's true. I think one of the problems here is that, as we've also discussed before, this is not something that really gets attention of policymakers in the first place, right? Like for any joint India-US initiative, the idea is that that there has to be a lot of groundwork laid for it. So there has to be interministerial consultations and the dialogues that India and US have, which you just mentioned. They have to build on that. And for example, even under the Quad, there is a working group on critical and emerging technologies, which is supposed to, look at biotechnology as well. And there has not been much development on that front as well. So I think the ambition is there. I mean, both in India and US, given their own national priorities and documents. But I think the cooperation, I think there are many avenues, but to have the institutional backing to convert those ambitions into deliverables, I think is a big problem. So, for example, what you said about R&D and the open access journals, and these are really like low hanging fruits. Like these should not be something which require a top level PM or president level like approach where they agree on something and then this happens. But so these are something that like they can be done at a fairly decent level of engagement at the level of ministries and officials. But it is in a way surprising that why this has not happened. I mean, we both did write about this need for even a collaboration among Quad countries on a biomanufacturing hub in India, which would serve as a resource for all the Quad countries to combine their respective strengths in their fields. And this hub in India would be able to at least serve as a platform for low cost manufacturing of bio manufacturing products, which would then help Indo-Pacific, the Quad countries themselves, and have an alternative supply chain apart from China. So yeah, what are your thoughts, Shambhavi? I think that there is potential, but I'm not sure that if there is appetite. I guess that once the big deliverables in terms of GE engines and semiconductors, once they are addressed in this trip, do you think that there might be more appetite for something on biotechnology? And what can we do? Should civil society and the industry take a lead here, like US IBC, the US India Business Council, and the business houses here, FICCI or CII, should they take a lead? Or I think governments taking a lead is something that is a prerequisite for that.
If I think very India centric, right? I have, as a Department of Biotechnology, has committed to more than doubling India's bioeconomy contribution, and they are the promote. This mandate is to promote biotechnology in the country, right? I think as that nodal agency, they should trust that there is a requirement that we uplift the entire biotechnology ecosystem in India. And I think one of the best starting points that is biomanufacturing, because it will very quickly, not very quickly, relatively quickly contribute to that goal of 5% GDP by the bioeconomy. It is something that we already have expertise in and would be relatively easy to build on. And it will create demand in the country for trained individuals. It will create capacity in the country which can then eventually spill over to more R&D and innovation. So if I think about the biotechnology ecosystem, I think increased cooperation in biomanufacturing. This could be through the US agreeing to set up a biomanufacturing facility in India, could be through company to company agreements facilitated by the government where, there are several drugs which are going to go off patent in this decade. So whether US companies can preferentially tie up with Indian companies who can then create biosimilars and have those manufactured in India for, at a certain quality for global sale, whether it is advanced purchase agreements for particular products that India can manufacture. All of these I think will help the biomanufacturing sector. And that I think for me is going to be the start of where then domestic policy can come in to not only foster biomanufacturing, but then also innovation, right? So through bioclustering, etc. For a biotechnologist, for someone who comes from the life sciences sector, I find biotechnology useful every day, right? I understand the economic and strategic importance of having G engines, etc. But if I can't get my medicine on time, anyway, it has huge impacts on people, right? You're looking at biotechnology as something that is going to solve health issues, that is going to something that is going to solve nutrition issues, that is going to increase human productivity, it is going to increase human standard of living. And so for me in my head, there is no comparison, right? I understand why this might be more appealing to a policymaker, why it has more appeal maybe as newspaper headlines, but day to day living as a science policy analyst, I would be very very happy if we sign one non, it doesn't catch headlines, but we sign one biomanufacturing facility deal. It doesn't have to be huge, but it is going to be the start of something that can really upend our biotechnology sector, because we have a lot of potential, right? We need that little spur, and I think that spur can come from here. So yeah, I would be really happy if we have even like a couple of US companies and come and show interest, right? A couple of universities that want to set up shop in India and say for higher education and provide kind of cutting edge R&D exposure to Indian students, which sometimes not a lot of students can get that kind of an exposure till they actually go outside of the country. So yeah, I would be very, very happy with that. What about you, Saurabh? You studied in the US.
Yeah. I mean, true. I mean, I think at least, given the trajectory of US India partnership, I think this is something that, is fairly anodyne and not something very controversial. So using, our respective strengths, and I mean, very, very, I mean, to summarize, the R&D dominance of the US and, the biomanufacturing capacity and capability of India, I think that could provide a synergy that I think would be really beneficial for both countries. And I think there is a huge potential for significant development, initiative, and cooperation in this regard. So let's see, I mean, what happens. I mean, there are huge expectations from this trip, especially in terms of defense and semiconductors and other critical technologies. And hopefully, once the top line things are done, it's the turn of the biotechnology sector to have
I
focus.
remember us having this conversation before the quad meeting, and obviously, there was, apart from that pandemic stimulation exercises, I don't think the quad summit actually discussed anything on biotechnology.
I mean,
Uh,
true. We are, I mean, I think in this, as policy analysts, I think we have to be cautiously optimistic. At the same time, I think we have to be a bit more optimistic that what we say, is heard and will be implemented at some point. Maybe a
you
bit
know what
late,
has
but
happened with biotech, Saurabh? It is in the friend zone. It has gone to the friend zone where you require it daily, yet you're like, huh, I will pay special attention at some point of time. It's
some
not
point of
my
time. So I mean, which is remarkable, right? Because you would think that, especially as the COVID experience showed, that there is a significant risk involved in a unregulated sector. At this, I mean, it is regulated. Not to say it is not regulated, but the point being that there needs to be significant cooperation, not an ad hoc mechanism during crisis, but something that and we all showed, right? I mean, countries showed that they cooperated. India was able to, India-US cooperation during COVID was also pretty substantial. So I would say that, it is a bit unfortunate that we have not been able to build on that template or at least build with as much momentum as one would have hoped. But hopefully, I think with a greater synergy on these issues, hopefully that optimism would lead to more substantial results. So that's the time we have, Shambhavi. Thanks a lot for being here, and hopefully our next podcast on this topic would be discussing great exciting announcements that have been made in this regard at some point in near future.
Cheers to that, Saurabh. Thank you for listening, everybody.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.